Okay, so let's start with a mental image. I want you to picture, maybe the most famous ship in history, the Santa Maria.
Right. The one from all the paintings.
Exactly. You're probably picturing this majestic, pristine vessel, right? Big white sails billowing in the wind.
A noble captain at the bow,
Mm.
staring heroically into the sunset.
Yes, the wind in his hair. It's the ultimate symbol of, like, exploration and glory. That's the image.
That is absolutely the romanticized version we've all been given. It's the image that's been carefully curated for, what, 500 years now?
Right, but let's actually look at the source material for a second. Let's look at what the sailors on the boat actually called it.
Oh, yes.
Because according to the records we have, the crew, they did not call it the Santa Maria. Their formal nickname was La Gallega, but colloquially, they called it the Dirty Mary.
The Dirty Mary. It immediately shifts your whole perspective, doesn't it?
Totally.
It wasn't some sleek explorer's yacht. It was a slow, heavy, probably leaky cargo ship. It was a rental.
It was a rental. Exactly. It sounds less like a vessel of divine destiny and more like a grimy long-haul truck you rent from U-Haul when you're moving and trying to save a few bucks.
And that gritty, unvarnished reality is what this is all about.
And that is exactly the vibe we are going for today. You are listening to Deadset History Checked. I'm your host.
And I'm here to help navigate the documents.
And today we are taking just a massive stack of library archives, legal documents, even psychological profiles, and we are looking at the man behind the statue, Christopher Columbus.
But the goal isn't just to tear the statue down.
No, we aren't here to cancel, and we are not here to build a shrine. We are here to clarify.
Clarification is the only goal.
Yeah.
Because the reality of Columbus is so much more complex and, frankly, way more bizarre than the simple hero or villain story we usually get.
So bizarre.
The documents show a man who was, on one hand, deeply religious, almost a mystic, but on the other, he was surprisingly manipulative and, at times, completely delusional.
And here's where it gets really interesting right off the bat. We think of Columbus as this, massive success story. He found the Americas. He changed the world.
The ultimate success.
But if you look at the biographical data, specifically from the People Profiles source, the man himself died believing he was a total failure.
He absolutely did. That is the great central irony of his entire life.
How is that possible?
He spent his final days just chasing titles, chasing financial dues he felt the Spanish crown owed him. He was completely convinced that he had failed in his primary mission.
Which was finding a quick route to Asia?
Exactly. He went to his grave, not realizing that he had accidentally altered the entire course of human history by stumbling upon two massive continents. He died thinking he was just some captain who got a little bit lost near China.
That just raises the blunt question for this whole deep dive then. Was he a genius navigator? Or was he just a guy who got incredibly lucky because a giant continent-sized roadblock happened to be in his way?
That is the question we have to try and answer. And to do that, you have to strip away the 5 centuries of myth and just look at the person.
So, okay, let's unpack the man. The hustle. Because he wasn't born into this, right? He didn't have a silver spoon. I was reading about his background in Genoa, and it feels very working class.
Very working class.
Yeah.
He was born around 1451. His name was Cristoforo Colombo, and his father was a wool weaver.
A wool weaver.
Now, wool weaving in Genoa at that time wasn't, destitute poverty, but it was manual labor. It was a trade. He definitely wasn't born into the nobility. He didn't have a family crest or a big inheritance waiting for him.
He's a tradesman's son. And I found this little detail in the People Profile source about his appearance, which I love. We always see him with that long white hair in the paintings, but apparently he was a redhead.
Yes, tall and red-haired, and probably with a very fair complexion that would have burned easily in the sun.
I never would have pictured that.
And that physical description is important because later on, when he's trying to make his way in the Spanish court, he stood out. He had a heavy Genoese accent. He looked different. He was a foreigner. He was always the outsider trying to break into the inner circle.
That makes a lot of sense. He always seems to have this massive chip on his shoulder about his status and his titles.
Obviously.
But the part of his origin story that really it floored me, and I feel like this should be a movie scene, is how he even ended up in Portugal. He didn't just take a job transfer, he was shipwrecked.
This is such a pivotal moment. I think it really tells you everything you need to know about his psychology. It's 1476. He's serving on a Genoese commercial expedition. They get attacked by French privateers off the coast of Portugal.
So a pirate attack, basically.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And the ship he was on catches fire and sinks.
And he doesn't just grab a lifeboat or something.
No. According to the story, he grabs a stray oar or a piece of wreckage, and he just starts swimming. He swam 6 miles to the Portuguese shore.
6 miles in the open ocean. I mean, try swimming 6 laps in a community pool and you're gassed. 6 miles is pure survival instinct.
It's an incredible physical feat. But think about the mindset it takes to do that. You're in the water, your ship is sinking, people are dying all around you, and you just refuse to drown. You refuse to give up. He washes up on the shore of Lagos, Portugal, half dead, and it's there, starting from absolute zero, that he completely reinvents himself.
That's the real phoenix from the ashes moment, isn't it? He washes up as a common sailor and he decides, no, I'm going to become a scholar.
That's exactly it. He makes his way to Lisbon, which at that time was basically the Silicon Valley of exploration.
A hub.
It was the hub. It was where all the maps were being drawn, where the navigational technology was being developed. He starts working with his brother, Bartholomew, as a cartographer. He learns Latin so he can read all the ancient texts. He teaches himself navigation. He constructs this whole new identity as a man of science and learning.
But he's not just drawing maps for other people. He's cooking up his own business plan, the enterprise of the Indies.
The big idea.
Sailing west to get east. And I think the common perception, the one I got in school, is that he just had this brilliant idea. He walked into a throne room, unrolled a map, and the queen was like, here's a bag of gold. Go for it.
Ah, the Disney version of history?
Yeah.
The reality was a decade of no. It was years of humiliations, rejections, and people basically laughing him out of the room.
And he didn't go to Spain first, did he? He shopped this idea around.
Oh, he went everywhere. He started with King John II of Portugal. Now, King John was no fool. He had a team of maritime experts, the Junta dos Matemáticos.
The Mathematicians Committee.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And he gave Columbus's proposal to them for review.
And what did they say?
They called him a big talker.
Yeah.
They looked at his math, which we will definitely get to because it's hilarious.
Yeah.
And they basically said, your calculations are fundamentally wrong. The ocean is way, way bigger than you think it is.
Yeah.
You will run out of food and water long before you ever hit Japan. You and your crew will die out there.
And the thing is, they were completely right.
They were 100% scientifically correct. Columbus was wrong. But he just wouldn't accept it.
So what'd he do?
After Portugal said no, he sent his brother to England to pitch King Henry VII. Rejected. He pitched the Spanish court. Rejected. Then he pitched them again. Also rejected.
It's the ultimate salesman story. The guy just would not take no for an answer. But why did they keep saying no? Was it just the bad math or was it the cost?
Because I read in the absolute history source that the voyage itself wasn't actually that expensive for a royal court.
That is one of the most surprising details of the whole story. We tend to think of this as this massive state investment, like the Apollo program or something.
Right, something that would bankrupt a nation if it failed.
But in reality, the keeper of King Ferdinand's purse, a man named Luis de Santangel, pointed out that the entire cost of the voyage was relatively negligible.
How negligible are we talking here?
It cost about 2 million maravedis. Now, to put that in perspective for you, that was roughly what the Spanish royal court spent in a single week on entertaining visiting dignitaries. Wait, say that again?
The whole voyage cost less than the catering and entertainment budget for 1 week at the palace.
That is wild. The voyage that literally changed the trajectory of the human species cost less than a week of royal partying.
It was a low-risk venture, financially speaking, a speculative investment. So the real reason they kept saying no, it wasn't the upfront cost. It was Columbus's demands. It was the back-end deal he wanted.
Ah, okay. The gold part of the God, gold, and glory trifecta? He wasn't just asking for a salary?
No, not even close.
Right.
He negotiated incredibly hard to the point of arrogance. He demanded the title Admiral of the Ocean Sea. He wanted to be Viceroy and Governor General of all lands he discovered.
All of them.
And the biggest one, he wanted 10% of all wealth derived from those lands.
10%.
Forever. Hereditary. Passed down to his sons and their sons forever.
That is a massive ask. That's like asking for 10% of the gross GDP of a new continent in perpetuity.
It is.
No wonder the kings and queens were like, hold on a minute. He wanted to be a business partner, not just an employee.
Exactly. He wanted to found a dynasty. He wanted to lift his family from that wool weaver status in Genoa to the absolute highest nobility in Europe. But we can't just look at the greed. We really have to look at what he said he wanted to do with all that money.
Right.
And this is where the God part comes in, which I think is so often overlooked in the modern discussion.
Yeah, we usually just frame him as this, like, capitalist explorer. But you brought up this source, the Book of Prophecies. This paints a very, very different picture of his core motivation.
The Libro de las Profecías. This is a document that Columbus compiled later in his life, but it absolutely reflects the internal drive that was always there. He wasn't just looking for spices and silk. He believed his voyages were divinely ordained.
Divinely ordained in what sense? Just like God wants me to explore, or something more specific?
Oh, very specific. He believed he was an active tool of biblical prophecy. He analyzed texts from the Bible, from saints, and he believed that the world was coming to an end very soon.
The apocalypse.
Yes. And he thought that in order to trigger the second coming of Christ, two major things needed to happen. First, Christianity needed to be spread to all nations on earth. And second, Jerusalem needed to be reclaimed from Muslim control.
Wait, so his grand plan was find the gold in Asia, use that gold to personally fund an army, and then go launch a new crusade to retake Jerusalem.
Precisely. He explicitly wrote to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella that the profits from his enterprise of the Indies should be used to fund a crusade to conquer Jerusalem. He saw himself not just as an admiral, but as a kind of warrior monk, a Christ-bearer, which is literally what the name Christopher means, who would unlock the funds necessary for the apocalypse.
That is so much heavier than the version I learned in 4th grade.
It is.
He's not just a greedy CEO, he's an apocalyptic visionary with a business plan.
It's a very dangerous combination. A man who believes God is speaking to him through geography and who also demands 10% of the profits to fund a holy war.
So eventually, after all the rejections, he wears them down. Or was it just the timing was finally right?
The timing was perfect. In January of 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella finally conquered Granada, which was the last Muslim stronghold in Spain. The Reconquista was over.
So they were feeling confident.
They were feeling victorious, they had some freed-up capital, and they were in a gambling mood. They essentially said, fine, give the Italian his 3 little ships. If he dies, he dies. If he succeeds, we get rich and spread the faith.
And so he gets his fleet. The Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria.
Or the Dirty Mary.
Or the Dirty Mary. And we should clarify something here about the crew. There's this persistent myth, I definitely remember hearing this in school, that because everyone thought the world was flat and they were all going to die, Columbus had to empty the jails to get a crew.
The Suicide Squad theory.
Yeah, that he sailed with a bunch of murderers and thieves because no one else would go.
It's completely false. It's a great story, but it's not true. According to the absolute history records and the actual muster rolls from the Port of Palos, these were mostly capable professional seamen.
So how did he get them to sign up? If he's this crazy foreigner with, notoriously bad math.
He had help. Crucial help. He recruited the Pinzon brothers,
Yeah.
Martin Alonso Pinzon and Vicente Yanez Pinzon.
And who were they?
These guys were local legends in Palos. They were respected captains. They were ship owners. They were guys the local sailors knew and trusted. Once the Pinzon brothers signed on, the rest of the sailors basically said, okay, well, if Martin's going, it's probably not a suicide mission after all.
So the Pinzon brothers are really the unsung heroes of the logistics here. Columbus is the visionary with the big idea.
But they're the ones who actually got the ships manned and moving.
Absolutely.
Without the Pinzon brothers, Columbus would have just been standing on the dock yelling at seagulls.
Yeah.
They provided the street cred that he completely lacked.
So we have a professional crew, 3 small ships, and let's just emphasize how small. The Santa Maria was a carrack, maybe 60 feet long?
Yes, a Nile or a carrack. It was heavy, it had a deep draft, it was actually terrible for exploring shallow coastal waters. That's another reason the crew hated it. The Nina and Pinta were caravels, smaller, faster, more maneuverable. But even so, 60 feet is tiny.
I mean, a standard tennis court is longer than that.
It's not much bigger than that. And you have dozens of men living on it for months.
And they are heading out into the completely unknown Atlantic. Which brings us right into part 3, busting the myths. Because once they leave the Canary Islands, they are sailing directly into a lot of misconceptions that we still hold today.
The biggest one, of course, being the shape of the planet.
Right. Okay, history check moment. Did Christopher Columbus prove the Earth was round?
No, he absolutely did not. And he didn't need to.
So people already knew.
In 1492, virtually every educated person in Europe, and certainly every sailor who spent their life on the ocean, knew the Earth was a sphere. The ancient Greeks had known it since Pythagoras. Aristotle proved it. Eratosthenes had measured its circumference with startling accuracy.
So the whole idea that everyone was terrified of sailing off the edge of a flat Earth is just
It's a
Nonsense.
19th century invention. It was largely popularized by the American writer Washington Irving, who wrote a very romanticized and very fictionalized biography of Columbus. In 1492, the disagreement wasn't about the shape of the world, it was about the size.
And this goes back to the math rejection he got in Portugal. What was the specific error Columbus made? Because you said he was bad at math, but how bad are we talking?
He was selectively bad. He cherry-picked data that made the world seem much smaller than it is. He relied heavily on the calculations of a 9th century Persian astronomer named Alfraganus.
Okay.
Alfraganus had calculated the length of 1 degree of the Earth's circumference as 56 2/3 miles.
That sounds pretty specific. Seems reasonable.
It is, but here's the catch. Alfraganus was using Arabic miles, which are significantly longer than the Roman miles that Columbus and the Italians were used to.
Oh, no.
Columbus took the number 56.6, but he applied it to the shorter Roman mile. He effectively shrank the circumference of the Earth by about 25%.
Wow, that is a massive conversion error. That's like confusing kilometers and miles on a road trip, but on a planetary scale.
It's exactly that. On top of that, he wildly overestimated the eastward size of Asia based on Marco Polo's writings. So in his mind, he made the Earth small and Asia huge.
Which meant the ocean between Europe and Japan looked like a manageable little pond.
Exactly. He thought it was a trip of maybe 2,400 miles.
And what was the reality?
The reality was closer to 10,000 miles.
So if the Americas had not been there,
They would have all died. Starvation, thirst, mutiny. It would have been a complete catastrophe. The Portuguese experts were right. A ship of that size simply could not carry enough fresh water for a 10,000-mile voyage. Columbus succeeded entirely because a massive, unknown continent happened to be blocking his path to certain failure.
that is the ultimate definition of failing upward. He was saved by the thing he didn't know existed.
And we can actually see his worldview on a globe made in that very year. The Martin Behaim globe, created in 1492 in Nuremberg. It shows the world exactly as Columbus imagined it. You have Europe on one side, Asia on the other, and just a manageable stretch of ocean in between, with the island of Sepingu, Japan, floating right in the middle, just waiting.
So he wasn't alone in his delusion. He was just the only one crazy enough to bet his life on it.
Precisely.
Okay, myth number 2, discovery. We always say Columbus discovered America.
Which is, of course, problematic for a dozen different reasons.
Starting with the obvious one.
The most obvious one is the indigenous perspective.
Yeah.
You can't discover a place where millions of people are already living, farming, building cities, and developing complex civilizations. That's like me walking into your house while you're eating dinner and claiming I discovered it.
Nice place you got here. I'll take it.
Exactly. But even if we look at it purely from a European perspective, he still wasn't the first one there.
The Vikings.
The Vikings. They were in Newfoundland, at Lanso Meadows around the year 1000, Leif Erikson. We have the archaeological proof.
But the Viking discovery didn't stick, right? Like it wasn't a game changer for the rest of Europe.
It was a dead end. The colony they established failed, and the knowledge of it didn't really spread. Europe just wasn't ready to expand outward yet. Columbus is historically significant, not because he was the first to arrive, but because his contact was sustained. He's the one who opened the door that never closed again.
But here's a little plot twist I found in the People Profiles source that complicates that. A guy named John Cabot.
Yes, Giovanni Caboto, another Italian, from Venice this time, but he was sailing for the English crown.
And he actually reached the mainland of North America before Columbus did, right?
He did. In 1497, Cabot landed somewhere that was likely Newfoundland or Cape Breton Island in Canada. At that point, Columbus had only been to the Caribbean islands, the Bahamas, Cuba, Hispaniola. He hadn't yet touched the continental mainland.
So when did Columbus reach the mainland?
Not until his third voyage in 1498, when he reached South America.
So technically, if we're talking about the continent of America, John Cabot beat Columbus by a full year.
He did. But Columbus gets the holiday and the fame because his voyages were the ones that triggered the immediate massive wave of Spanish colonization. Cabot's voyage was important, but it didn't spark that same immediate gold rush that Columbus's did.
Okay, myth number 3. He died poor and destitute. I have this image in my head of him as an old man, a beggar in his final years.
Also a myth. The Absolute History source is very clear on this. He was not poor by any normal standard. He was actually quite wealthy from the gold he did manage to find on Hispaniola and his share of the early trade. But he was bitter.
Bitter about what, if he had money?
Bitter about the titles, about the 10% of everything. The Crown quickly realized they had signed a catastrophically bad deal once they started to understand how big this discovery was. So they started walking back his privileges, stripping him of his powers. He spent his last years in a constant state of litigation, suing the crown for breach of contract.
And that brings us to the Book of Privileges. I looked this up, the Library of Congress description of this artifact. It's fascinating.
It's an incredible document. In 1502, before his fourth and final voyage, he could feel the walls closing in on him. So he gathered notaries and judges, and he compiled every single document, every letter, every royal promise the king and queen had ever made to him.
And he had them all copied.
He had them copied and bound into these beautiful books. It's basically a scrapbook of you owe me.
A legal mixtape of grievances.
Exactly. He sent copies to the Bank of St. George in Genoa for safekeeping. He carried it around with him like a weapon. It shows a man who was completely obsessed with his status. He wasn't wandering the streets begging for bread. He was wandering the courts begging for respect and authority.
And he never really admitted he'd found a new world, did he?
No, this is the whole West Indies confusion. To his dying day, he insisted that Cuba was a promontory of China and that Hispaniola was the biblical land of Ophir, or maybe near Japan. He interpreted everything he saw through the lens of what he wanted to see, not what was actually there.
Which is why we get the term Indians.
Right. He thought he was in the Indies. And the legal documents from the time reflect this confusion. They couldn't call it Asia because the geography just didn't match up, so West Indies became the legal workaround. A new name for a place he refused to admit was new.
Wow. Okay, so we have this religious, litigious redhead who is terrible at math but incredibly persistent. He finally gets across the ocean. He spots land, October 12th, 1492.
And this is the point in the story where the tone has to change. Because up until now, it's an adventure story. It's an underdog story.
Yeah.
But the moment they step off the boat, it becomes a tragedy. This is part 4, the darker turn.
Yeah, the first encounter. It starts out so deceptively friendly, doesn't it?
It does. They land in the Bahamas on an island the natives call Guanahani. The Taino people swim out to meet the ships. They're curious. They bring gifts, parrots, balls of cotton, spears tipped with fish teeth.
And what did Columbus think of them?
He writes in his journal that they were handsome, well-built, and incredibly generous. He says, quote, "They invite you to share anything they possess and show as much love as if their hearts went with it." It's a very positive first impression.
But then, literally in the same journal entry, the vibe just shifts on a dime.
Instantly. He looks at them, and he doesn't see friends or equals. He sees resources. In that very same entry, he writes, "They ought to be good servants and of good skill. I could conquer the whole of them with 50 men and govern them as I pleased."
Talk about a massive red flag. He's been there for 5 minutes, they're handing him gifts, and he's already calculating how many soldiers it would take to enslave them all.
And he didn't just write it down, he acted on it almost immediately. He kidnapped 6 natives.
Why?
He wanted to take them back to Spain to teach them Spanish so they could act as his guides and translators to find the gold he was sure was just around the corner. He viewed them as objects to be used.
And this really sets the tone for everything that follows. Let's talk about Hispaniola. The Santa Maria sinks there, all right?
Yes. On Christmas Eve, 1492, the Dirty Mary hits a sandbank and is lost. He can't fit everyone onto the smaller Nina for the return trip, so he has to leave 39 men behind. He builds a fort called La Navidad Christmas using the timber from the wrecked ship.
He goes back to Spain, gets his hero's welcome, shows off the parrots and the little bits of gold, and then he comes back on the second voyage with a massive fleet.
A huge fleet. 17 ships, 1,200 men. This is not an exploration party. This is a colonization force.
But what does he find when he gets back to La Navidad?
He finds a graveyard. The fort is burned to the ground. All 39 of the Spaniards are dead.
What happened to them?
Well, according to the local accounts he managed to gather, the Spaniards hadn't just been sitting around waiting patiently. They had started fighting among themselves over gold and women, and more importantly, they began raiding the local Taino villages.
Raiding them for what?
Demanding gold. And, very disturbingly, taking multiple local women as wives by force. They were brutalizing the population. Eventually, a local chief, a cacique named Quiabo, had enough, organized a counterattack, and wiped them all out.
This feels like the big turning point, because Columbus doesn't take this as a lesson like maybe we shouldn't mistreat the local population.
Yeah.
He takes it as a declaration of war.
He takes it as a deep personal and political betrayal. This is where the explorer fully becomes the tyrant. The second voyage was not a mission of discovery. It was a mission of conquest and subjugation. And by all historical accounts, Columbus was a terrible governor. He was paranoid, anxious, and incredibly brutal.
The absolute history source details this tribute system he set up. I think we need to explain exactly how this worked because it's one of the darkest parts of this whole story.
It is genuinely gruesome. Columbus was under immense pressure from the crown to pay back his investors. He hadn't found the Great Khan or the markets of China. So on Hispaniola, he imposed a quota system in the gold-producing region of Cibao.
A quota for what?
Every native person over the age of 14 had to bring a hawk's bell full of gold dust every 3 months.
A hawk's bell. What is that? Like a little sleigh bell?
Exactly, a small bell. If they brought the required amount of gold, they were given a stamped copper or brass token to wear around their neck. This was their receipt, their proof of payment.
And if they didn't bring the gold? If they were caught without the token?
A punishment was having their hands cut off.
What?
Their hands were severed. They were then left to bleed to death or to live as maimed examples to the others.
That is just stomach-turning. And this wasn't just a threat, he actually did this.
It became a reign of terror. The fundamental problem was there wasn't that much surface gold on Hispaniola. It wasn't the gold-rich island Columbus had imagined. The quota was impossible for most to meet. So people fled to the mountains. They stopped planting their crops in the hopes of starving the Spaniards out. Famine set in.
And that's on top of the diseases.
Exactly. European diseases like smallpox and influenza were already ravaging the population, who had no immunity. But this calculated, systematic brutality accelerated the complete collapse of Taíno society.
And he also tried to start a formal slave trade, right? He sent ships full of people back to Spain.
He did. He sent 500 enslaved Taíno people back on the second voyage. He wrote to the Queen, arguing that the natives were cannibals, a charge for which there was little evidence and therefore could be legally enslaved. He saw them as a cash crop.
But this is where the politics get really interesting. Queen Isabella actually pushed back on that.
She did, and this is a nuance that often gets missed in the modern debate. Isabella was very pious. She considered the native peoples to be subjects of the crown. They were potential Christians to be converted, not enemies of war to be sold.
So she was against it.
She was furious with Columbus. She actually ordered that the survivors of that shipment be found, returned to Hispaniola, and freed. She was angry that Columbus was treating her new subjects like cattle.
So Columbus is actually more brutal than the 15th century Spanish monarchy, which that's a pretty high bar for brutality.
He was desperate. He had promised gold, and he couldn't deliver, so he tried to deliver bodies instead. And his desperation led to chaos. The Spanish settlers hated him too. We rightly focus on the horrific treatment of the natives, but he was also flogging and executing Spaniards.
Why were they rebelling?
Because the colony was a disaster. There was no food, there was very little gold, and everyone was sick. The settlers felt Columbus had lied to them about this paradise, so they rebelled. And Columbus responded with the gallows. He was hoarding food supplies and locking them away from his own men.
And all of this leads to the big plot twist that I think a lot of people just do not know about. Columbus gets arrested.
Yes, in the year 1500. The complaints from the colonists had become so loud and so frequent that the king and queen finally sent a royal commissioner, a man named Francisco de Bobadilla, to go investigate what was happening.
So Bobadilla arrives in Santo Domingo. What does he see?
He sails into the harbor, and the very first thing he sees are the bodies of 2 Spaniards hanging from the gallows. It's a scene of total dysfunction and tyranny. Bobadilla conducts a very quick investigation. He interviews the angry colonists, and then he makes his move.
He arrests the admiral of the ocean sea.
He arrests Columbus and his 2 brothers. He claps them in irons, real chains, and he puts them on a ship and sends them back to Spain as prisoners.
Just imagine that visual for a second. The guy who discovered the New World, sitting in the brig of a ship, chained up like a common criminal, sailing back across the ocean he conquered.
It was the ultimate humiliation. But here is the real insight into his psychology. The captain of the ship, out of respect, offered to take the chains off once they were out at sea, and Columbus refused.
He refused. Why would he do that?
He wanted to wear them. He wanted to appear before the king and queen in chains to show them how he had been martyred and mistreated. He kept those chains for the rest of his life.
No way.
He kept them in his room. He even requested to be buried with them. He turned his failure and disgrace into a symbol of his own victimhood.
He was such a drama king, but he talked his way out of it, didn't he?
He was incredibly charismatic when he wanted to be. He cried. He pleaded his case. He showed his physical ailments from the voyages. The queen eventually forgave him, probably just to get him to stop crying, but she stripped him of his governorship. She said, "You can go exploring one more time, but you are never, ever allowed to rule Hispaniola again."
So he gets one last shot, the fourth voyage, and this one sounds like an absolute horror movie.
It was a complete disaster from start to finish. He's older now, he's very sick, he has severe arthritis, his eyes are bleeding from a constant infection, and his ships are literally rotting.
Rotting. How?
Shipworms, teredo worms. There are these mollusks that bore into the wooden hulls of ships in warm tropical waters. His hulls were turning into Swiss cheese. The ships were sinking right out from under his feet. He barely managed to make it to Jamaica before he had to intentionally beach them to keep them from sinking.
And he's stranded there. For how long?
A full year.
Yeah.
From June 1503 to June 1504, stranded on a beach in Jamaica. His men are mutinying, stealing the last canoes to try and paddle to Hispaniola. The local natives are tired of feeding them. They are starving to death.
And this is where we get the eclipse trick. This is my favorite MacGyver moment in all of history. It almost feels too perfect to be true.
It does, but it's very well documented. The locals had cut off the food supply. Columbus was in a very tight spot, but he had a secret weapon. He had a copy of an astronomical almanac, the Almanac Perpetuum, by a German astronomer named Regiomontanus.
Why on earth did he have a German astronomical almanac with him on a beach in Jamaica?
Because navigation at that time required these kinds of astronomical tables. And Regiomontanus's almanac was the gold standard for predicting the movements of the planets and the moon. Columbus looked at the table and saw that a total lunar eclipse was predicted for the night of February 29, 1504.
So he decides to play God.
He calls a meeting with all the local chiefs. He tells them that his Christian God was very angry with them for not bringing food, and that as a sign of this divine anger, God would blot out the moon that very night.
And then,
Right on schedule, the moon starts to disappear into the Earth's shadow. It turns that deep, blood red color that you see during a total eclipse.
the natives must have freaked out.
They were terrified. The source says they came running from all directions with food and provisions, begging him to ask his God to restore the moon.
And what did he do?
He said he would go speak with his God. He went into his cabin not to pray, but to watch his hourglass. He knew from the almanac exactly how long the eclipse would last. He waited for the shadow to begin passing, then he dramatically emerged and announced that God had forgiven them. The moon came back, and the food supply was never cut off again.
That is just, it's manipulative, it's brilliant, and it's deeply problematic all at the same time. It shows how he used knowledge as a weapon.
It really encapsulates Columbus perfectly. He was a man of science when it suited him, and a man of mysticism when it didn't. He used advanced European technology to exploit a situation for his own survival.
But during all this, while he's pulling off these genius survival tricks, his mind is also kind of unraveling, isn't it? We touched on the delusions he had earlier.
Yes. This is the psychological aspect that gets completely left out of the school books. This is especially true on the third voyage. When he reached the mouth of the Orinoco River in what is now Venezuela, he saw this massive volume of fresh water flowing into the ocean. Scientifically, this should have proved to him that it was a massive continent. Only a huge landmass could produce a river that big.
But he didn't conclude continent.
No. His theory was that he had found the literal biblical Garden of Eden.
The Garden of Eden, like with Adam and Eve.
Yes. He wrote to the monarchs that the earth was not a perfect sphere after all. He said it was shaped like a pear or like a woman's breast, and that the nipple of this pear reached up closer to heaven, and that on top of that nipple was the terrestrial paradise, the Garden of Eden.
So he's sailing around the coast of South America thinking he's climbing a celestial pear toward paradise.
Essentially, yes. And this delusion extended to his geography of other places, too. On the coast of Cuba, he was so desperate to prove it was China that he sent a notary around to the entire crew. He forced every single sailor to sign a legal oath swearing that Cuba was not an island, but was part of the mainland of Asia.
And what if they disagreed?
He threatened that any officer who later denied it would be fined 10,000 maravedis, and any common sailor who went back on his word would have his tongue cut out.
That is the definition of gaslighting. Agree with my inaccurate map, or I will have you mutilated.
It shows his complete desperation to be right. He was literally bending reality to fit his old worldview because he just could not accept the new one that was staring them in the face.
So he eventually gets rescued from Jamaica, he goes back to Spain, and he dies in 1506. But he leaves behind this just massive, complicated legacy. Which brings us to part 5, legacy and lead-in.
the legacy wars, as they're sometimes called.
We have this concept of the Black Legend. Can you explain what that is for us?
The Black Legend refers to the historical trend of depicting the Spanish Empire as uniquely and exceptionally cruel and depraved. It was partly propaganda spread by the English and the Dutch, who were Spain's rivals and wanted to challenge their power. But the primary evidence for the cruelty comes from a Spaniard himself, a man named Bartolomé de las Casas.
The priest.
The priest, yes. Las Casas is a fascinating figure. He came over to the New World as a settler. He owned an encomienda, which was a grant of native land and labor. He owned slaves.
So he was part of the system.
He was. But he had a profound conversion of conscience. He became a Dominican friar and spent the rest of his long life fighting for indigenous rights. He transcribed Columbus's journals. He knew the man.
But he also wrote the big exposé.
He wrote a short account of the destruction of the Indies. And it is a catalog of horrors. He details the massacres, the rapes, the testing of sharp knives on living people. He is the main reason we know about the details of the atrocities.
So the anti-Columbus view isn't just some modern woke invention. It started with a guy who was literally there, watching it happen in the 1500s.
Exactly. Las Casas was screaming, "This is wrong," while it was happening. So when people today say we are judging Columbus by modern standards, that's not entirely true. His own contemporaries, Queen Isabella, Bobadilla the investigator, Las Casas the priest, all judged his actions and found them wanting.
But then on the other hand, we have the hero narrative. We have the statues Columbus Circle, Columbus Day. How did that happen if everyone knew he was a tyrant?
That narrative came much, much later, especially in the United States in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It was driven largely by Italian-American immigrants.
Why them specifically?
They were facing intense discrimination and anti-immigrant sentiment in the U.S. They wanted a historical figure that tied them directly to the foundational story of America. They wanted to be able to say, look, an Italian was here first. We belong here.
So Columbus became a powerful symbol of Italian-American pride and belonging.
Yes. They were the ones who lobbied hard for the federal holiday. It was about assimilation and patriotism. And in that process, the heroic explorer narrative completely pushed the tyrant narrative into the background for a long time.
And there's no denying the otherworld concept. The Library of Congress source talks about this. Even if he was a brutal tyrant, he did break the medieval worldview.
He did. Regardless of his profound moral failings, his voyage is the great dividing line in modern history. There was the world before 1492 and the world after 1492. He forced Europe to confront the existence of an other, a place that wasn't in the Bible, that wasn't in the ancient texts of Greece and Rome, completely shattered the intellectual containment of the Middle Ages.
But he never got the name. The continent isn't called Columbia, it's America.
Poor Columbus. The final irony. Amerigo Vespucci, another Italian explorer, was the one who figured out the one thing Columbus couldn't bring himself to admit.
Which was?
This isn't Asia. This is a mundus novus, a new world. He wrote that down in a letter that went, for the time, viral. Became a bestseller. A German map maker named Martin Waldseemüller read it, was impressed, and put the name America on his massive 1507 map of the world. And it just stuck.
So Columbus does all the work, suffers the shipwrecks and the chains, and Vespucci gets the branding rights because he actually knew where he was on the map.
That's history for you. Sometimes accuracy matters.
So, okay, here's the final provocative thought for everyone listening. We look at Columbus and we see the disease, the slavery, the start of a massive conquest. And we ask ourselves, if he hadn't done it, would it have all been better?
It's a powerful what if to consider. But you look at the historical context. Portugal was already going around Africa. England was sending Cabot across the North Atlantic. Ship technology was advancing every year. Europe in 1492 was a powder keg. It was ready to explode outward.
So if it wasn't Columbus in 1492, it would have just been Cabot in 1497, or the Portuguese Captain Cabral in 1500. Someone else was going to do it.
Almost certainly. The collision of the two worlds, the old and the new, was inevitable. The Atlantic was getting smaller every year. Columbus was just the spark that happened to light the fuse first. The great tragedy of the contact, especially the disease exchange that killed millions, that would have happened regardless of who the captain was.
But Columbus, he set the specific tone for it, didn't he?
He absolutely did. His unique personality, his obsession with gold, his apocalyptic religious zeal, that flavored of extraction and evangelism, because those were Columbus's two driving forces. If it had been the English or the French who made first sustained contact, the history might have looked very different in its details.
History doesn't cancel, it claps back.
Indeed. We have to look at the wreckage he left behind, but also at the bridge he built. It's a bridge made of bones in many ways, but we are all still walking across it today.
And that is a lot of wreckage to sift through. We've looked at the documents, we've looked at the maps, we've gone through the accusations, we've seen the Dirty Mary, the red hair, the chains, the eclipse trick. But what would the man himself say if he could answer for his crimes?
That is the ultimate interview we can never have.
Or can we? Next time on our deep dive, we are doing something a little different. We are going straight to the source. We are feeding all of these journals, all of his personal letters, and the personality profiles we've discussed into a sophisticated AI model.
So we're going to interrogate the
A
admiral.
full AI interview with Christopher Columbus.
Mhm.
We're going to ask him about the cutting off of hands. We're going to ask him about the gold tribute. We're going to ask him why he wouldn't just admit he was lost.
It should be a fascinating and probably unsettling conversation.
You will not want to miss it. Thanks for listening to Deadset History Checked. See you in the new world.